Welcome to episode 9 of Travelling Science. G'day legends, welcome back to Travelling Science, the podcast that's sharing science with the world. My name's Jesse Crow and I'm the Travelling Scientist, coming to you today from the Gold Coast in Australia. I'm a health science communicator, and on this podcast we interview researchers, doctors and experts, hearing their stories and sharing their ideas that can help you to live a smarter, happier and healthier life. This week's guest is Dr. Catriona Nguyen-Robertson, the singing scientist. She sings in the laboratory and contemplates science in the shower. But Catriona is actually a wonderful friend of mine, and we studied immunology together at the Peter Doherty Institute for Infection and Immunity. And now she teaches science communication at the University of Melbourne, and she's a learning facilitator at Scienceworks. During our discussion today, Catriona answers questions like, how does DNA work? Can you develop allergies as an adult? Can we overcome our allergies? How long does it take to create a vaccine? And why science communication is so important. And we discussed ideas such as hipster immune cells, sunscreen science, tuberculosis, science museums, curing peanut allergies, PCR, earworms, science wiggles, and she even sings a song for us live on the podcast. So get pumped for that. But before this week's interview, I'd just like to quickly share a review of the show with you. And this week's review is from Nat, who said, I really like the asides which make the episode more fun and easy to understand. The vibe of Jesse and his voice is soothing. I really learn a lot from Travelling Science and would recommend it to anyone who has a deep passion for science. Well, cheers, Nat. Thank you so much for tuning in and taking the time to leave a review. And if you're listening now and you like the show, please leave a review, reach out and let me know, and I will send you a special gift. Alrighty, I think it's time to listen to my discussion with the one and only Dr. Catriona Nguyen-Robertson. Catriona, welcome to Travelling Science.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being here today. Just to get started, would you like to tell us exactly what did you study at university?
I studied a Bachelor of Science and majored in Immunology, but alongside that I did a diploma in languages. I wanted to do a diploma in music, but my parents were like, no, that's not going to be so useful. And look at me now, I pair music and science. So yeah, I did that, and then I did honours with yourself, which was super fun and awesome, and then did a PhD in immunology, just kept sticking around uni.
Yeah, we're actually old buddies from university, which was a good time doing our honours. And then I did not go and do a PhD yet, but you did. And what exactly did you do there?
Well, I started off by doing basic immunology. And when I say basic immunology, that's kind of more discovery science and not something that's directly relevant to everyone's lives. So that's what I started off with, just looking at what I call hipster immune cells, in that not many people study them, so I'm a hipster in that sense. But they're what we regard as unconventional immune cells. And so I was just kind of trying to work out, these are new kids on the block, what do they look like, what do they do, what are they doing in our bodies? And during my PhD, I had an allergic reaction to sunscreen. And, being an immunologist, I was like, oh, the immune system's involved. Oh, I think T cells are involved. What's going on here?
All right, quick immunology lesson. T cells are part of your immune system, and there are two main kinds. There's killer T cells, which kill infected cells, and helper T cells, which call for help during infection. Also, T cells are different to B cells, which produce antibodies to fight infections. And so yeah, that's basic immunology right there. But who knew that the immune system could be triggered by something innocent, like sunscreen? What?
I sent an email to the company whose sunscreen I'd used, because I'd used their sunscreens before and I was fine. But I was not fine with this particular one. So I sent an email to the company and I was like, hey, can I get a list of the ingredients? I research immunology. I study science. I want to know. And they sent me the list of ingredients, and there was one that looked like it could activate the very immune cells that I was working on and trying to sort of learn about. And so it was $5 to get that particular ingredient from Amazon. So I bought it, whacked it in experiments, it activated the immune cells, and then that started a whole new project. So instead of just doing, what are these cells? What do they do? What do they look like? I then started looking at what are they doing in skin allergy? And that was kind of nice to put like my own project together. It was like my little baby.
Wow, you found the ingredient on Amazon for $5?
Yep. I mean, shipping was more. But, in terms of like for scientific research, like ingredients, reagents, they're expensive. And so to get something for $5, that was pretty good.
I will pay you the $20 shipping. This is going to
exactly.
completely change my PhD. That's incredible. These unconventional immune cells that you were talking about, can you give me an example? Like what sort of, do they have names? Will I have heard of them?
Yeah, well, they're what we refer to as lipid reactive T cells. So what they do is kind of in the name, they respond to lipids, so the broken down products of fats and oils, like the teeny tiny building blocks, I guess, of fats and oils. I was looking at what sort of fats and oils do they recognize? And the bacterium that causes tuberculosis, TB, that's covered in unique fats. And so I was looking at, can these lipid reactive T cells respond to the TB bacterium? And turns out they can, so that's good. So started looking at, can we use those maybe in improving the vaccine for TB? Because at the moment the vaccine's like not the best. It's good at preventing really bad severe disease in children, but it's not very good at protecting against the lung form of the disease, which is what most people have.
Okay, so tuberculosis is not a fun disease. But then again, what is a fun disease, right? It's caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Crazy, right? Anyway, the vaccine is given to young children, which protects them from getting sick while they're still developing. But in adults, the efficacy of the vaccine ranges between, get this, 0 and 80% effective in protecting people from tuberculosis disease in the lungs. What? If you offered me a vaccine and said that the efficacy is somewhere between 0 and 80%, I just probably wouldn't bother. So it makes sense that these new cell types Catriona was looking at could improve the vaccine. But forget TB because we're talking about skincare products now.
And then, it's like, there are lots of oils in sunscreens and skincare products. And so, that was a really nice sort of change in direction for my project.
That's very cool. And I can't believe that all stemmed from you going to the beach one day and or whatever you were doing and put some sunscreen on and you did your own little science experiment accidentally. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, not even just one day, because the way that when the specific type of immune cells that I work on, they don't respond immediately. They kind of need time to build up an army and build up a response. So the first time I went to the beach and wore the sunscreen, I was fine. It was the second time and the third time that I got a rash, which is what tipped me off to, maybe it's these cells.
Very cool. But you are the singing scientist. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How did that start?
Well, it was an idea that I was sort of playing with for a while, and it kind of began with FameLab, which is a competition for PhD students and early career researchers. So they've just finished their PhDs, and their job is to communicate their science in 3 minutes. And it's sort of like the 3-minute thesis kind of competition where you're shortening a whole thesis into 3 minutes, which is a tough job. But the 3MT, you get a slide, a static slide, and no props, no costumes. It's very like, here's a slide, here's me. Whereas with FameLab, it's go nuts. You don't get a slide, but use props, use costumes, use whatever you want.
I'm imagining like X Factor or Australia's Got Talent, except it's really sciencey.
Yeah, and I've made a lot of friends from it. So some of my friends who did it, one studies bees and so dressed up as a bee, and another mate studies the good and bad sides of the immune system in cancer, and so dressed up with like sort of did Two-Face kind of thing, which was awesome. And what I did was I spoke about some of my old work, which was looking at the impact of exercise on the immune system. And so I, for the semi-finals, I dressed up in sort of sporting gear and talked about the immune system. But for the finals, what I did was talked about why I got into that, which was partly because my aunt got cancer when I was little, and I didn't understand why we had to stop running around, going to the park, doing lots of exercise. And my research later in life kind of answered that question. So what I did was I dressed up as a little kid and did have you seen Matilda?
So maybe you had a deprived childhood, or maybe you're just evil and you hate musicals. But Matilda is a classic story, originally written and published in 1988 by Roald Dahl. And it's about a girl who, crazily, is called Matilda. And she loves reading and learning and basically being a nerd, like most scientists. But she's oppressed by her harsh family and her strict school. Oh, and also she's like magical, which definitely makes the story more interesting. Anyway, they turn Matilda into a movie with Danny DeVito and a musical. And in that musical, there's a particular song called When I Grow Up, which inspired Catriona to do this.
I was just like, when I grow up, I will be a scientist to find out why some people can't play sports when... No, it was something. Yeah, so I did that on a stage in front of a lot of people, and then that was sort of the opening, and then I spoke about the science and then summarized it in song form, like going back to the Matilda song. And that was really scary, but it worked, and it was very well received. And so I thought, oh, maybe I can do this kind of thing, like changing lyrics for songs that people know and can... go like, oh yeah, that's familiar, but changing the lyrics to make it a little bit more sciencey and educational. So then later that year, Science Gallery Melbourne asked me to speak at an event for Disposable, which was one of their pop-up exhibitions before they now have a home.
Science Gallery Melbourne is a place where art and science collide, and if you're ever in Melbourne, definitely go and check it out. They host 2 exhibitions per year, and the one that Catriona was involved in was called Disposable, which took people on an artistic dumpster dive to find creative solutions to our throwaway culture. But that was in late 2019.
They asked me to speak at an event around waste, and I was just like, this is Science Gallery. Like, I have to do something creative and arty. So I did speak about waste, but then again, I sort of summarized things as songs, and it was well received. But shortly after, this thing called COVID happened, a pandemic.
I did. I think I heard about that. That happened.
Yeah, it happened. It was a thing, and I think a lot of people were just kind of overwhelmed with the amount of information that was out there, and I thought, look, I'm stuck at home. I want to do something, and so I took out a ukulele and started singing songs about COVID-19, about the disease and what's happening in our bodies, about the virus and how it's transmitted, what it's actually doing, and another song about the importance of masking up. So yeah, that's how I sort of started as the singing scientist.
That's very cool. I actually went on your website this morning and binged all your videos. They're incredible. Catriona's website has a bunch of science songs that she wrote and sang while playing ukulele, and they are seriously bingeable and shareable. Definitely check it out. It's neuroscientist.com, spelled N-Y-U-R-O, scientist. And the link is in the show notes below. Check it out now. Thank me later. Yeah, there's a song about poo, there's a song about genetics, there's a bunch of really good songs about how the immune system works, and I think I love the lyrics that you use are quite clever, and I think they're quite good ways to sort of make people laugh and also make people remember the concepts. Like, they're quite educational. It's not just, this is a nice funny song. It's like, they work. It's really effective.
Well, thank you. Well, my hope is that, you know how we all have those songs stuck in our heads at times, like those earworms? My hope is that if the songs that are stuck in people's heads are about science, it means that if they're kind of like thinking about the lyrics, they're learning about science.
So I had never heard the phrase earworms before, and I don't like it. That is going to give me nightmares. Why can't it just be a song that's stuck in my head? Why does it have to be a worm inside my ear? That is just haunting. Ugh. What do you hope? Do you have any sort of long-term goals? What do you hope to achieve? Are you going to continue making science songs, or is that just sort of something you do on the side?
Well, it is kind of something that I'm doing on the side, but also something that I am really considering pursuing as a thing that I do. I do write a couple of songs for Scienceworks.
Scienceworks is another sciencey museum in Melbourne. And I know, technically sciencey isn't actually a word, but it should be, right? I mean, things can be sciencey. Also, I realise that if you don't live in Melbourne, you probably don't care about Scienceworks, but you should, because you will probably travel to Melbourne one day. And apart from good coffee and bad weather, Melbourne has a buttload of culture, so get excited. Anyway, Scienceworks is mostly for kids, so if you got them, go nuts. But if you don't, they also have a planetarium there, and sometimes they do night shows for nerdy adults who want to stare into the cosmos while drinking a locally brewed wild ale, like something from Blackout's beer. So good, look it up. The beer and the Scienceworks.
I currently present there as a learning facilitator, and I present shows, and I do really, really short, like twinkle, twinkle, little stars, stars will twinkle, planets won't, that sort of thing, when I'm in the planetarium to point out, like, oh, how do you tell the difference between the stars and the planets when you're looking in the night sky? And that's it. Stars will twinkle and planets will not. So I just sort of slip those in there. But I also do write like 1 minute, 2 minute songs every now and then about particular exhibits or particular programs. So most recently for Illuminate, which is a gallery that's just closed, just to sort of send it off, I wrote a song about light and colour, and how we see what happens when light hits different things like mirrors and lenses. So that was fun. But I guess my dream, the dream is to do something like The Wiggles, but sciencey and educational. So singing songs about science, doing experiments, just doing things that get young people, especially children, interested in science and learning about it and just being curious.
Science Wiggles? Is this a thing? I just assumed that Sciencey Wiggles was a thing. Why is Science Wiggles not a thing? Well, it doesn't matter, because Catriona is so lovable and so entertaining that I have no doubt that it's going to be a thing in the very near future. Well, Catriona, seeing as you are the singing scientist, I wonder if you would be able to play a song for us today here on the podcast. Is that a possibility?
I would be delighted to, Jesse.
Hell yes. Awesome. What have you got for us?
Well, I thought I'd start off with some basic biology. It's what we call the central dogma of biology. So DNA going to RNA, going to protein. It's like one of the first things the biologists learn.
Very cool. Incredible. I'm excited.
DNA is the code we start from. It's read by our cells. At the center of the nucleus is where it dwells. DNA is the code that makes you, defining the person you grew into. DNA, RNA, and protein. DNA is broken into parts called genes. It's up to special enzymes to work out what they mean. They read the DNA and copy it as RNA, because they can't leave the nucleus, so it has to stay. DNA is wound up nice and tight, so that certain genes in certain cells are out of sight. If you unraveled all your DNA, the whole platoon, it would stretch all the way from here to the moon. DNA, RNA, protein, yeah, that's our code. DNA, RNA, protein.
That was incredible. You have such a beautiful voice, Catriona.
Well, thank you. I try.
And I really love that line. Something about the platoon, and if you spread out all your DNA, it would go all the way to the moon. Like, it's really cool. You visualize it.
Like several times, actually.
Yeah, it makes you visualize that the DNA stretched out is incredibly long. And I think that's a really cool concept that you captured really well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we've got lots of DNA.
How much DNA, you ask? Well, 3 billion nucleotide base pairs. But what does that even mean? Well, if you take all the DNA from a cell and stretch it out, it's about 2 meters long. And you're probably thinking, that's nothing. But that's just one cell. If you take all of the DNA from all of your cells and stretch it all out, it wouldn't just go to the moon and back. It would be about twice the diameter of the entire solar system. And all of that DNA is wrapped up inside your body. That's freaking insane. And to learn more about our DNA, check out episode 4 with geneticist Eleanor Sava. But why? Why do we have so much dingo flippin' DNA? Yeah, and most of it doesn't code for anything. Like, it's a lot of junk and spacing DNA, right?
Yeah, although I know a lot of people who would not like it to be called junk DNA because it kind of has a purpose. It doesn't encode proteins and things like that, but it's very important to work out what's actually being switched on, what's off, what's being produced by cells. So yeah, you're right in that, for a long time we've been calling it junk DNA.
True. I apologize to anyone who is offended by the term junk DNA. It's definitely not junk. It's something. I don't know what it is, but it's something. Yeah.
It's got a purpose. Yeah. We don't completely know all the purposes, but surely it has purpose.
Well, thank you so much for playing that song. That was incredible. And Catriona has so many more songs that you should all definitely go and listen to. But now, you're a science communicator. You're a singing scientist. What exactly are you working on right now?
I'm doing several things. I've already mentioned that I'm working at Scienceworks, which is really fun because I get to work with lots of kids and inspire them to want to know more. And I love it when they have questions for me after the show. And even though sometimes it can be like a tight schedule, I'm like, no, I'm going to make time to answer your questions because questions are amazing. And then if I can't answer, I'm like, that's a great question. You should look it up. And so that's one thing I do. I also teach at the University of Melbourne, teaching research scientists how to communicate their work, because I think it's very, very important that scientists know how to share their work with different audiences, whether it's the general public, which is kind of important given that the general public is what funds research through taxes and things like that. But also, I think it's important that people in a specific science field or discipline know how to talk about their work to other scientists, because interdisciplinary research is becoming much bigger, much more important to solve global challenges and really to answer any research question. So if we're all like in our niche little pockets with our jargon and our technical terms that no one understands, we're not going to progress. So yeah, it's really fun to teach lots of different research students and hear all about their work. And they're sort of the main two things that I do. So
you're a science communicator that teaches science communication. I think that's very meta and very incredible, something that needs to be happening more, because science communication is important, and that's why we're doing this podcast today. Just to mix it up a bit, what do you do when you're outside of the lab? What do you do when you're not thinking about science? Or are you always thinking about it?
I'm always thinking about science. No, well, I do sing in a choir, which is fun, and it's I think good to have a hobby that has a schedule, because it means I'm going to be out of the lab at this time. I cannot work during these hours. So that's really fun. And it's with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra Chorus, and that means that I get to listen to an amazing orchestra play. So that's really fun. And I try and hang out with friends as much as possible, because I know during my PhD, and I think during a lot of people's PhDs, we sort of stress out a lot. We don't have the best work-life balance.
If you're currently going through a PhD, I feel for you. In fact, if you're doing any stressful work, I get it. Stress levels are running high, and yeah, it's hard to maintain a work-life balance. And if this is you, well, last week's episode with Dr. Anna Panida was all about improving focus and reducing anxiety in a professional setting. And next week's episode is all about mastering your cortisol to reduce stress levels. So listen to those if you're struggling with a work-life balance.
So I'm kind of trying to make up for time and trying to show my friends, you're really important to me. I'm so sorry that I've been so busy.
Yeah, so spending time doing music and spending time with friends. That sounds good. Catriona, do you have any book recommendations for someone who might be interested in the field of science in general?
Yeah, there are some really interesting history of science books out there. I read one that was on the history of insulin, which was really fascinating because I hadn't really thought about what it was like for people with type 1 diabetes before insulin was available. And it was pretty much a death sentence. Like you were not going to survive long. So it was really interesting to hear about how they tried to survive and also how the whole field of biotechnology evolved because of insulin and the need to produce insulin for people with diabetes. But a really good book that stands out in my mind is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, because I read it and it just changed the way that I viewed the way that science is done, really. If you're not familiar with the story of Henrietta Lacks, she is the person who had cervical cancer, and she was a Black woman in a time when Black women did not have many rights. And so some cells were taken from her cancer, and they were the first cells, human cells, to be able to be grown and propagated. So they like just kept dividing, they kept growing outside of a person. And so they've been invaluable in biomedical research and in all sorts of different scientific endeavors. But it was just really interesting to hear her story and her family story, because her cells have been so vital to biomedicine, yet her family have all these health problems and they weren't clued in at all until much later. So yeah, it's a really fascinating book. It pairs history and science, and maybe I'm just like a little bit of a history nerd too, and that's why I'm recommending history and science books. But yeah, they're fascinating.
Yeah, those Henrietta Lacks cells are still used in laboratories around the world from these cells that were taken from Henrietta so long ago.
Which is a standard process, I should say. Like, when people have cancers, we take biopsies, but it just so happened that they then also started taking those cells to grow.
I realised that Catriona actually didn't mention the name of the insulin book, but it's called Breakthrough by Thea Cooper and Arthur Ainsberg. And the other book, Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, was written by Rebecca Skloot, and you can get these wherever you get your books. But also know that Radiolab did a podcast episode on the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and it was definitely worth listening to. I don't remember what happens, but I feel like it was juicy and intense, and I'm going to re-listen to it real soon, maybe when I go to the beach next. I don't know. Awesome. Thanks for those book recommendations, Catriona. Do you have any daily rituals that you swear by? Anything that you do every day or try to do?
Oh, I used to go swimming every day, and then, that thing that we talked about, COVID happened. But then I found an outdoor pool, which was great, and I felt comfortable, and I loved it, swimming in an outdoor pool every day. But it's only open from October to April, so I'm currently not swimming. But I do cycle every day. I cycle to and from work, and that's kind of nice. That's my thinking time. I think that's what I really liked about swimming and what I like about cycling. I can think, sometimes I think up song lyrics and things during my cycle, and then I have to keep circling through those same words in my head so that I remember it by the time I get to the other end.
So you don't listen to podcasts when you're riding your bike?
No, while I'm riding my bike, no, because I don't like listening to anything. I feel like I need to pay attention to cars, having been hit a couple of times. I don't want to risk it.
That makes a lot of sense. That's very smart. So if you're listening to this while riding a bike, great job helping the environment and exercising, but please be careful. I don't want to be the reason that you ride out in front of a car or roll over somebody's foot. That wouldn't be nice for you, and it's not going to be nice for the foot either. I think it's important to spend some time outside where you're not listening to anything and you are just with your own thoughts. So that's when you have some of your best ideas, right? I have got some listener questions for you if you're ready to answer them.
Hit me.
But before that, every week here on Travelling Science, we make a donation to a charity of the guest's choosing. And this week, Catriona has chosen to donate to Deadly Science, a foundation that provides science resources to remote schools in Australia that are often underfunded. Deadly Science is working to improve the quality of education in these schools, and a donation has been made on behalf of Dr. Nguyen-Robertson. If you'd also like to make a donation to Deadly Science, you would be changing lives. And if you'd like to support this show and the charities that we donate to every single week, well, I would truly appreciate that as well. And in both cases, the links are in the show notes just below. But now, back to Travelling Science. B. Diggsy wanted to know, and we might have seen this recently with COVID, but how quickly can we make a vaccine with modern technology?
Well, yeah, we did see it faster than ever before with COVID. What did that take? Like about a year, just a little bit over a year before we started seeing it in people. So the question is, can we do it that quickly with something else? Because you have to think about the fact that the whole world stopped and a lot of research stopped with people being funneled into COVID research. So whether or not that would happen with something else and we can, get such great momentum and, great collaboration is, the big question. So obviously it's possible, but, we might not know as much as we need to know about other diseases and how other infections work to be able to do it so quickly. Other things.
Yeah, I suppose it depends partly on what we're making a vaccine for and how rapidly it's changing, but also the fact that normally human trials are normally done over years and years of time, and the COVID vaccine was quite unique in that it was really rushed through a lot of trials.
Yeah, and not only that, like you do animal trials for some time before you go into humans. So yeah, it was very fast-tracked.
Totally. Apple V was wondering, can people develop intolerances to food or animals as they get older? And if so, is it preventable or can you overcome it?
Well, I'm more familiar with people going the other way. So people who react to certain things when they're younger and then they develop tolerance, which is an immunological term. Like we talk about tolerance in the immune system. And a big thing is peanut allergies and people developing tolerance to that as they grow older. I guess in terms of my research, I guess I sort of saw myself become more intolerant to certain things. And while I can't specifically say why you might be intolerant to onions now, at least for me, the immune cells that I work on, I mentioned that they're lipid reactive, so they're reacting to oils and fats. And I did mention that they can react to the fats on the tuberculosis bacterium. And it just so happens that I did get the TB vaccine, the BCG vaccine, when I was little. And so over time, I've been developing this army of lipid reactive cells, lipid reactive immune cells, that can specifically recognize these fats and these oils. And so that's potentially why I then had an allergy. And people who have bee and wasp venom allergies, they tend to have more of these cells. So perhaps one reason that people could develop intolerance is that over time, they're building up an army of immune cells that can fight a certain thing. And the more you're exposed, the more your immune system's like, got to get rid of it, which is a great thing when we want to fight infections. And that's the whole point of vaccination. You see it once in a safe format, and then when you actually get the real thing, you respond faster and better, and it's great. But it could be a reason why people develop intolerances to things.
So the possibility of overcoming an onion intolerance, it might get worse before it gets better, or I guess it's very unique. It's hard to say.
It is really hard to say because, like I said, people also go the other way. So it really depends on what's happening in your immune system, because there are different sort of arms of the immune system. And I know for peanut allergies, at least, people are trying to drive the immune response away from allergies and going like, we have to fight this, to, maybe it's kind of just like a bacteria and we can deal with that. And that's Mimi Tang at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute actually did that. It was just I'm going to put some bacteria in together with the probiotics together with peanuts, and it really works. It gets children's immune systems to, rather than go allergy to peanuts, they're like, oh yeah, we can handle this. It's just kind of like seeing some bacteria for a bit. That's fine.
Wow, that's super interesting. All right, it sounds like there could be hope yet. We'll move on to the next question. Natski Footy Mason is wondering how a spike protein is formed.
So in my song, I was talking about DNA, RNA, protein. That's sort of the central dogma in biology. That's how any protein is made. So you have this genetic code, DNA, and then that's what we say transcribed into RNA, and then that's translated into a protein. So how you'd get a spike protein is that there's this genetic sequence, this genetic code of DNA, a particular combination of 4 letters, A, T, G, and C, that somehow has the code to be translated eventually into a protein that happens to be in the shape of a spike. So it's all to do with what is in the building blocks, and then that, it's amazing. Molecular biology is just so mind-blowing to me how it all works. But, a simple sequence of 4 letters will mean that you get a protein with a certain structure that's folded in a certain way in 3D, and it might look like a spike.
Thanks so much for answering those listener questions, Catriona. And if you're ready, we've got a lightning round.
Oh, pressure's on.
Who inspires you most?
Crystal DiNapoli, a great astrophysicist who's also a Gamilero woman, and she's pairing Indigenous astronomy and knowledge with Western science, and I think we need to see more of that happening.
That sounds very cool. I'm going to look into that. I did look into that, and it turns out that Crystal DiNapoli is a fellow science communicator who focuses on Indigenous knowledge and equity in STEM. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And she also co-authored a book called Astronomy Sky Country, which looks at the connection between Aboriginal people and the behaviour of the stars. That's very cool. I need to read this. What is your favourite science song that you've made over the years?
I think Solving COVID-19 is kind of like my baby. It's the first one that kind of went out there and spread, and it was informative as well and well received, and so that made me really happy at the time.
Fantastic. If you had an unlimited science budget, where would you like to see that money invested?
I think it needs to be invested everywhere, because you never know what a scientific discovery is going to lead to. Who would have known that studying volcanoes and what can we find in volcanoes would have led to an enzyme that can be used in PCR, and people are probably very familiar with what PCR is, and it's heat stable because it came from bacteria in a volcano, and we can now use it in gene sequencing, in diagnostics, in all sorts of biomedical research. So I think it's really hard to pick. You never know what the capabilities of something will be and what something will turn into.
Totally. And like you were saying before, all of the different sciences can often are working together now more than ever to achieve so many great things. So yes. If you'd never studied science and you did something completely different, what do you think you might have done? I
kind of like history, so maybe I'd go into that. But I really loved Japanese, and I loved it enough to study it in uni. So perhaps going into teaching English in Japan.
I like that. And what's your favourite place to travel?
Anywhere family is.
Very cool. What is your favourite thing about science? What do you love about it?
The fact that you can constantly keep learning and asking questions and discovering. And with science and being a scientist, you could be the first person in the whole world to learn something or know something.
Yeah, totally. What is your least favourite part about science?
It is a little bit consuming, which sometimes I appreciate and sometimes I'm just like, oh, I need to step back a little bit.
Absolutely. You need to go for a swim. You need to go do some singing, spend time with your friends. Well, Catriona, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate all of your singing, your science communication, everything you do. You educate so many people about so many things.
Well, likewise, Jesse. I'm so happy and proud and being yeah, I'm your friend when I see everything that you're doing too.
Oh, thanks so much. Here we are, changing the world. I've just got one last question for you. If you had one bit of advice that you'd like to leave listeners with today, maybe something that they can go home and act on to improve their lives in some way, what would your one bit of advice be?
Well, I know I am one person saying this, but question things, question everything, question what I'm saying. No, but seriously, I think people need to be a little bit more analytical about information. There's so much misinformation out there. There's disinformation, and even some things that we see in medical practice, some things that we see in agricultural practice and ecological conservation practice. It's based on not the most solid of sciences, but because it's just what was done for so long, we kind of just stick with it. So if anyone's recommending things to you, look up why, just question everything.
So there you have it, legends. That was the singing scientist, Dr. Catriona Nguyen-Robertson. And she's probably the most kind-hearted, sweetest, talented person that I know. Not only does she understand complicated science, but she can take that information, put it into an awesome song, and share that with the world. I just find that so incredible. So I highly encourage everybody to check out the singing scientist by going to her website. The link, again, is in the show notes just below. Check out some of her songs, share them with your friends, and keep an eye out because sooner or later, this girl is going to be on TV as a scientific version of The Wiggles. I would 100% watch that, hands down. I don't even care if it's for children. I would still love it. Anyway, legends, I want to tell you a secret, but before I do, if you're enjoying this podcast, there's 3 epic things that you could do for me. Number 1 is to make sure that you're subscribed to Travelling Science for more episodes every Science Sunday, and there's a video version on YouTube as well as an audio version wherever you podcast. Number 2 is to tell your friends about me. Actually, whether it's your siblings or your workmates or even your dad, I don't know. Anyone who might be interested, let him know that Travelling Science exists. And number 3, if you don't have any friends to tell, you can tell the world by leaving a review. Because reviews are super important for new podcasts like this one, but almost nobody does it. So if you do, that would be awesome. Let me know and I will send you a special gift. And I'll probably read it out on next week's episode. And if you stick around to the end of the episode, I always leave you with a little secret. And this week's secret is that I'm going to Canada, soon. See, I used to live in Canada during COVID, but I was forced to fly home and I had to leave my car and my bank account behind. And Canada's been hassling me about those things for years. So next week, I'm flying back there to deal with my car, to deal with my bank account. So if you live in Canada, let me know because I'm super excited to get back to the Great White North. Anyway, legends, thanks so much for listening. I'll catch you all next Science Sunday.